What a week in the market. I'm going to chime in and give you my sense of what's going on, so let's dive in. Hey, so welcome to this week's Mortgage Minutes with Mitch. I am Mitch Jenkins, Senior Loan Officer with Your Home Financial. So, huge announcements this week. The first one, my daughter turned 6. All right, that happens once in a lifetime, but maybe a little bit bigger and eclipsing that was Liberation Day, as it's been called by President Trump. So we had the implementation of the largest tariffs our country has implemented in over 100 years, which is pretty wild, and the market obviously had a reaction. So we'll get into that, but I want to start with some positive news. Mortgage rates, as a result, have come down to about their lowest level in 6 months. Now, the reason for that is because a lot of people put their money in the stock market when it's doing well, because you can make a lot of money there. But when things get a little uneasy, they take that money and put it in the bond market, which is what drives mortgage interest rates. Kind of a safer haven, so to speak, for your investments. It's a slower, steady return. So what I tell my clients is kind of like the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise is the bond market, where it's a slow and steady pace, but you should make money as long as people pay the mortgages. And then you got the hare, which is the stock market, where it can take off in a hurry, but can also come crashing down just like that. So the other good news is that oil is now trading at about $62 a barrel, the lowest it's been trading at since 2021. So that alone is deflationary, because everything in the world is pretty much produced from crude oil at its foundation. So the fact that oil has come down, the cost of goods, the cost of transporting goods, everything should come down at least a little bit with it. Now we'll talk about what everyone's talking about, and all the headlines this week is that the huge market crash and the Dow lost 1,700 points on Wednesday after the tariffs were announced. So yes, the market took a huge hit. But I want to give you some perspective, because I think, to me, it was more of a market correction. Now, I'm not an economist. I don't really have anything to base this on other than my interpretation of what I see here. So to kind of explain what I'm thinking, I want to go back to February of 2020. Now, this is right before COVID, right before the market took a huge dive and everything just kind of went haywire. And in my opinion, it's kind of been a little haywire since, if you haven't noticed. So let's start with the S&P 500. So back in 2020, February of 2020, it was at about 3,300, which is pretty much an all-time high. Now today, even after the market correction, it's at 5,100. So just in a few years there, 3,300 all the way to 5,100, that's about a 55% jump. In such a short amount of time, that's not sustainable. Now, same thing with the NASDAQ. So in February of 2020, it was about 9,100. Today, it's about 15,000. So that's another huge jump. We're talking about a 65% jump in the NASDAQ. So, very similar, and again, that's after the correction we saw this week. Dow, no different. So the Dow in February of 2020 was about 29,000. Today, it's right around 39,000. So that's a jump of about 34%. So across the board, even though we're taking a pretty big hit these last couple days, I mean, considering where we were in February 2020 pre-COVID, we're still way better than we were. So that, to me, if we had such a huge market correction and yet we're still, 30, 40, 50% above where we were 5 years ago, that tells me there's a little bit of a bubble in there that just needed to be burst. Now, hopefully it doesn't come down any further. I certainly hope that's not the case, but just want you to have that perspective. When you look at the long-term market and what's been going on, this is not a sky is falling kind of graph. This is a typical market correction kind of graph. Now, again, maybe I'm putting a silver lining here on something that could end up being horrible, but I just want to tell you what my thoughts are as of today. Now, one of the questions I get a lot is, do you think the housing market's in a bubble? And that's a little bit of a different story, because when it comes to housing market, everything's based on supply and demand. And it's a much different formula than the stock market. So when it comes to housing, we're still in a huge shortage. We still do not have the inventory to provide all the housing that Americans need. So one thing I want to look at is, if you look at the average sale price of a home in 2020, that was about $391,000. That's nationwide. Now, if you look at where it's at 2024, it jumped all the way up to $512,000. So that's a 31% jump just in those 4 years. So yes, that is potentially a bubble, but that's the lowest gainer compared to the stock market. And again, that's after these huge adjustments we're seeing this week after the tariffs. So the housing market has not seen a downward revision or any kind of adjustment. So it is up, and it's continuing to go up, and all everything points to that still continuing into the future. So buying a home is still one of the best investments you can make, still one of the greatest ways to build wealth. And with mortgage rates at 6-month lows, I think it's a great time to put your hat in the ring and look into buying a home if that's something you've been thinking about for a while. And if you bought in the last couple of years and you're thinking about refinancing, it could be a great window to get in there now, get that rate locked, and make sure you take advantage before anything changes and we see things go back up for any reason. So I'm here to help. Let me know what I can do. I would love the opportunity to work with you. And please let me know your comments. If you agree, if you disagree, you have your own take, would love to hear it from you. As always, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.